Like the Rov, the Rebbe, to make a סיום from Rosh Chodesh Mנחem until 15 B'Ov, we have the honor to meet the Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashiva, Menal Ruchli from Yeshiva Stam Chetvim, and Rav Achosid, Rav Israel Kaflan, is going to make a סיום on Mesechta ערובין. Everybody, please stay.
Okay, so when I get to the סיום of Mesechta ערובין, so there's one hadron, although it's customary to share a vart to get to the end of the Mesechta, there's one hadron from the Rebbe on Mesechta Ceirovin in Talmud Bavli, and there's one hadron from the Rebbe on Mesechta Ceirovin in Talmud Yerushalmi. The hadron on Mesechta Ceirovin it's a heavy hitter. It's a very deep and complicated hadron. So I'm going to share a short vart, not going to get to the end of the Mesechta, but going to get to a very well-known Gemara in Mesechta Ceirovin and Daf Yud Gimel. The Gemara says in Daf Yud, then we'll proceed to the סיום. So the Gemara says, very well-known Gemara, that for 3 years Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel debated, they argued who the halacha follows. Beis Shammai said, Halalu Emrim, that the halacha follows us. And Beis Hillel said, Halalu Emrim, the halacha follows us. Until finally a Baskol came out and said, Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elikim Chaim, but halacha ke Beis Hillel, halacha ke Beis Hillel. And the Gemara continues to ask, being that both the words of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are divrei Elikim Chaim, so why is the halacha dafka like Beis Hillel? And the Gemara responds and says, that they were anoichin v'aluvim hayu, they were pleasant, they were bashful, the shoinin divrei and divrei Beis Shammai, and they would also learn not only their own opinion, but they would learn also the opinion of Beis Shammai. The Gemara adds, v'lo'oid ela shemagdimin divrei Beis Shammai l'divrei. Not only would they teach the words of Beis Shammai, would they learn it, but they would also first learn the opinion of Beis Shammai, and only then learn their own opinion, teach their own opinion. So there's many different questions on this Gemara. There's many different questions, but I'll stick to the question is, once we say that, what does it mean that Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elikim Chaim, but nevertheless the halacha is like Beis Hillel, right? We all understand that there's a bir al pi chassidus. What does it mean al pi nigla that Eilu divrei Elikim Chaim and the halacha is like Beis Hillel? And what does it mean that for 3 years Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued who the halacha follows? If they say their opinion, but Pashtus they say that this is the halacha taka follows my opinion. What does it mean they argued who the halacha follows like? Right? And what does it mean when the Gemara concludes and says that because makdimin, because they would first say the words of Beis Shammai and then they would say their opinion, therefore the halacha follows them. Why is that? Why does that have any bearing on what the halacha is like? The idea that Shoyin Divrei and that they would say the opinion of Beis Shammai, they would learn the opinion of Beis Shammai. So for Shtetzach, they would think about what Beis Shammai said, and only then they would say their opinion. So it means it's a different opinion. They would consider the other tzad. But what does it matter that they were makdim the words of Beis Shammai to their own words? Why is that not get to the halacha? So there's a beer that's brought down that there's a famous question. The question is, what does it mean that there's b'chlal a question who the halacha follows, Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel? But Pashtus, Achrei Rabim Lahatis, you always follow the majority, and Beis Hillel is the Rav. We know that Beis Hillel had the Maila, that they were the majority. Although Beis Shammai was Mechadet Ditvei, they were sharper, but Beis Hillel was the Rabbim. They were the majority. So why is there even a question who the halacha of Taka follows? So there's a beer that's brought that this that we say, Achrei Rabim Lahatis, that we paskin like the Rav, is davke in a situation. Torah is saying, in a situation where a halacha l'maisa is brought down to Bezdin, or to Sanhedrin, and specifically they gather together to solve a certain question, and they vote on it, and it comes out that there's a majority, so you have to say Achrei Rabim Lahatis. You follow the Rav. Like the lashon of the Gemara, Nimnu v'gamru. You count, you make a count, a question is brought to the Sanhedrin, and they come together to decide the question, and then whatever the Rav says, then the halacha taka follows the Rav. But let's say you have different people learning in their base medrash. They're taka learning the same question, but they're not coming together on this question. There's one base medrash, and there's another base medrash, and they're not necessarily dealing with the question together in one shot. So then you don't have to say Achrei Rabim Lahatis. The rule of Achrei Rabim Lahatis doesn't apply. It's not a Gzeres HaKasav. And if we paskin like the Rav, it's only because the fact that most people hold that opinion, it shows that it's a more mistaber opinion. It makes taka more sense. But there's no rule of Achrei Rabim Lahatis in a situation where they didn't discuss the halacha, they didn't discuss the question together. And so Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had different yeshivas. Yeah? They didn't come together for a question wasn't brought in front of them and then we're going to make a vote. They weren't nimnu v'gamru on most things. And so therefore, there's no rule necessarily that Achei Rabbim Lahatis. Right? It could be that the halacha follows Beis Shammai because they're more sharp. Like sometimes we say halacha is like a certain Tana al Chavei Rav. Even though he has many people that disagree with him, but because how sharp he is, so therefore the halacha follows him. So it could be taka the halacha is like Beis Shammai. But says the Gemara, and that's what it means. They're both the words of the Eibishter, meaning that there's a svara to say the halacha is like Beis Shammai, and there's a svara to say the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Each one has his mila. The Raiv is not a defining factor over here; it doesn't override. But the Gemara says that because they would also learn the opinion of Beis Shammai, so it's aderech like you say halacha kebasroi. The halacha follows the later opinion, even though the earlier dairis were sharper. But the later dairis, they considered also the earlier opinion. So in Mela, the halacha taka follows the basroi because they had a chance to think about the earlier opinions. And that's why it's very important for the Gemara to add and say that makdimin divrei Beis Shammai le'divrei. First they would say Beis Shammai. Just like basroi, just like when you have two different generations. So the second generation, first they don't come with their own opinion and then go to consider another opinion. Maybe tainted with their own opinion. Rather, first they're makabel, and then they come to their own opinion. So al derech zeh Beis Hillel. It's not that they had their own opinion and then they went to think about Beis Shammai. First, they were makabel from Beis Shammai, and only afterwards they came up with their own opinion. So al derech, like you say, halacha kebasroi. So therefore we say that the halacha is taka like Beis Hillel. That's the vart in Nigla. Just a little short vart in Chassidus. The Zohar says that ani reichav ala chamar, ani yisar sheteves, Eiruvin nidan yavamis. And for different reasons, we say that these three mesechtas are called ani. Some people say because of how shver they are, how difficult they are. In fact, there's a brought down from the Shiar Knesset Agdayla. He said that some people were nimna, some people refrained from learning these mesechtas because it's ani, whatever that means. Because of its ani, it's Rosh Tevis ani, so they wouldn't learn these mesechtas. But al pi primis anyanim, we understand from what it says in Hemshech Samach Vav, it explains Barichas, the idea of Yegia and Torah brings to a very, very deep gilui when a person is misyageh and Torah. So these three mesechtas are difficult mesechtas, and you have to be misyageh very much to understand the mesechtas. And hopefully that brings to us a special gilui. It's connected to the gilui of Mashiach, ani v'rechav al chamer. Just to see what the mesechta, the last Mishnah, the Mishnah brings down a machlekes. What happens in a situation where a kohen finds a sheretz, what is a source of tumah? What happens if he finds it in the Beis Hamikdash? What does he do with it? Does he take it out with his clothing? Make sure that he shouldn't touch it, because then he becomes tameh. But does he take it out with his clothing right away, even though he's now going to be metameh his clothing? Or does he go and look for a pshutei kli eitz, just a raw piece of wood that's not going to be mekabel tumah, that's not receptive to tumah, and with that piece of wood, he's going to go and he's going to take it out, even though it's going to take longer for him to find the piece of wood. But it's better that he shouldn't add tumah to his clothing. Rather, he should go and look for something else. So this is a machlekes of the Gemara. What a kohen does in a situation? Does he immediately take it off with his clothing, even though he's increasing the tumah to his clothing? Or does he wait, taka, and he goes and searches for a piece of wood that's not going to become tameh, and that we take it out of the Beis Hamikdash? And the Mishnah finishes by saying that Rab Shimon says, "Malkim sheitiru lecha chachamim mishalach nasnu lach, shaleitiru lecha elo mishum shvus," which the Gemara explains to mean. It's not really, the Rebbe explains in his Hadron how it's all connected to the previous part of the Mishnah, but the Pashtus, the first Chelek, Mokem Shetirul Chachamim Shalchan Nasnulach, Rab Shimon is saying that if a person finds himself outside of the Tchum of Shabbos, outside of the jurisdiction of Shabbos, Rab Shimon says even if he's 15 amas outside, he could go back in. Why? Because the people that would make siman and the people that would mark where the Tchum ends, Dafke, would mark it a little bit early, right? Because maybe people will make mistakes and they'll go further ahead, so they would take a market early. So Mishalchan Nasnulach, they allowed you to go back inside of the Tchum, inside of the Daldamis, even though you left. Why? Because Mishalcha, because you're still within the Tchum. It's Mishalcha. That's the first part of what Rab Shimon says. And the second part of what Rab Shimon says is Shleitir Lecha El Mishum Shvus. It's a different nekuda. He's saying that there's a machlekes earlier in the Mishnah. What happens if a kinner, if you have the harp in the Beis Hamikdash, the string of the harp tears? So what happens? Do you tie it? Yeah, or do you do aniva? Aniva means like you braid it without making a knot. So Rab Shimon says that although he's making when it comes to tchumen, the situation that we mentioned earlier, but beneget, the situation of the tearing of the harp, the string of the harp in the Beis HaMikdash, he says that you're not allowed to do a kshira, you're not allowed to make a knot, rather you have to do a niva. And the Gemara finishes by saying, the Amalei Rab Shimon, oin va'aniva, you make a braid. Why? Because even if a person makes a braid with the intention of leaving the braid like this for a long time, it should be shal kayama, but it's not a chiyuv chatas, it's not a melacha d'iraisa. So therefore, sharu le'rabana. But kshira da'asil de'chiyuv chatas, but if he makes a knot and he leaves it there shal kayama, so it's going to be a chiyuv chatas, lo yisharu le'rabana, chachamim were not matter him to do that, and hadan l'cha meitzit tefillin, uslikal mesech t'seviv.
Let me say it Abbas Yisrael, vergessen Sie.
Huh?
Ich habe es sagen Abbas Yisrael.
Abbas Yisrael.
Everybody should give tzedakah, the Rav, the Rebbe, the Indian of Abbas Yisrael. Shkoyach.
Verstanden wir es so? Mechem Aluvin. Mechem Aluvin.
Shkoyach. דושמן, מה הוא אמר? אתה כל כך הזדעד, מה הוא אמר? תגיד לי עכשיו מה הוא אמר. אתה הרי שמעת כל כך טוב, אז תגיד לו מה הוא אמר.
למה צריך להגיד? אני כבר אמר. זה גזות.
זה הצרפתים האלו. Very small, isn't it? Come on.
That's not just a Chiddush Ma'aseh Bereishis, it's going back to Koydem Acher, going back to Koydem Abriya. To give them the reason where the Rebbe says Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, that should be felt. So we continue another part in Shita Sarabah. Gam Ledivrei HaRambam, Koydem HaMitzvot Sheyach HaMashiach. Also according to the Rambam, the way he speaks and he talks about the Nifloid that Mashiach will do, the same. Ledivrei HaRambam, Oides HaChazor Ele Yomim Shekoydem Eitz Hadas, and also about the Rambam, where the Rambam says that we're going back to the days the way it was before Chet Eitz Hadas, still, no year the Moisei Mashiach